Melinda French Gates just dropped a bombshell that has sent shockwaves through Washington and the global philanthropic community. In a carefully orchestrated interview with CBS News on February 1st, she made her most direct public statements yet about the Epstein documents and what they reveal about her ex-husband's relationship with the convicted sex offender. And this isn't some vague statement issued through lawyers or a brief comment to reporters. This is calculated public positioning that legal experts say could have massive implications for ongoing congressional investigations, civil litigation from Epstein victims, and the future of the Gates Foundation itself. When one of the world's most powerful women decides to publicly distance herself from her ex-husband's conduct and specifically references sealed documents she reviewed during divorce proceedings, you know something seismic has just happened. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So, what exactly did Melinda reveal that has everyone talking? In the CBS interview, she stated for the first time on the record that Bill Gates' relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was a significant factor in her decision to file for divorce in May 2021. She specifically referenced meetings between Gates and Epstein that occurred as late as 2014, contradicting her ex-husband's previous public characterization of their relationship as limited and focused on philanthropy. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, "I made it very clear how I felt about his dealings with Epstein, and I made those concerns known to him on multiple occasions starting in 2013. Sources familiar with the interview preparation say Melinda's legal team spent weeks reviewing what she could say publicly without violating confidentiality provisions in the divorce settlement. The fact that they greenlit these specific statements tells you everything about how serious this has become. This isn't just personal drama between ex-spouses or tabloid gossip about a high-profile divorce. Members of Congress investigating Gates' Epstein ties immediately seized on Melinda's statements as potential corroboration of evidence they've uncovered in newly unsealed court documents. Representative Nancy Mace, Republican member of the House Oversight Committee, told Fox News on February 2nd that Melinda's timeline matches up perfectly with documentary evidence showing extensive contact between Gates and Epstein during precisely the period she identified. And believe me, when congressional investigators find that a billionaire's ex-wife is confirming their findings about concealed relationships and contradicted public statements, that investigation just got exponentially more powerful. It's honestly stunning to watch one of the most private individuals in American business decide to go on the record about matters she has carefully avoided discussing for nearly 3 years. Here's the full picture of what's been unfolding. Speculation about the role of Epstein in the Gates divorce has circulated since 2021, fueled by investigative reporting that revealed Melinda had met with divorce lawyers as early as October 2019, just months after Epstein's arrest and death. But Melinda had never confirmed those reports or addressed the Epstein connection directly until now. Everything changed, according to multiple sources, when newly unsealed documents from Epstein-related litigation were released in mid-January, showing not just meetings between Gates and Epstein, but financial transactions through offshore entities and email communications that painted a picture of sustained collaboration. The timing here tells you everything you need to know. Melinda's interview came just 2 weeks after 53 members of Congress launched formal investigations into Gates' Epstein connections, and just days after forensic accountants testified to congressional committees about suspicious offshore financial patterns. This wasn't coincidence. This was strategic positioning by someone who knows exactly what's in those sealed records and has decided that her interests are best served by making clear she objected to this relationship from the beginning. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where it really gets serious. When Melinda's attorney was asked whether she would cooperate with congressional investigators if subpoenaed to testify about what she knows regarding Gates' Epstein relationship, the attorney did not rule it out. Instead, the attorney issued a carefully worded statement saying Melinda would review any official requests and make decisions in consultation with legal counsel. Legal experts immediately recognized this language as leaving the door wide open to potential testimony. And let's be honest for a moment, if Melinda French Gates, one of the most credible voices in global philanthropy and women's empowerment, testifies under oath about what she learned regarding her ex-husband's relationship with a convicted sex trafficker, that testimony becomes perhaps the single most damaging piece of evidence in the entire congressional investigation. Here's what multiple sources close to Melinda say happened behind the scenes. In late January, shortly after the congressional investigations were announced, Melinda held a series of meetings with her legal team, public relations advisors, and trusted philanthropic partners. According to two people familiar with those discussions, the consensus view was that the newly unsealed documents would eventually force her to address the Epstein connection publicly, and that getting ahead of potential subpoenas with a controlled interview was preferable to being dragged into testimony without establishing her narrative first. One source described the strategic calculation in blunt terms. She needed the public to understand that she objected to this relationship, that she made her concerns clear, and that ultimately his refusal to end contact with Epstein despite her objections played a role in ending the marriage. By February 1st, when the CBS interview aired, Melinda had crafted a statement that threaded an incredibly narrow needle. She confirmed the Epstein connection was a significant divorce factor. She established a timeline showing she raised concerns as early as 2013. She made clear she finds Epstein's crimes abhorrent and that anyone who continued associating with him after his 2008 conviction showed deeply troubling judgment. But she carefully avoided discussing specific meetings, particular financial arrangements, or anything that might violate the confidentiality provisions reportedly worth tens of billions of dollars. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now, things get absolutely wild. When legal experts analyzed the interview, they noticed something significant that most viewers missed. Melinda referenced documents I reviewed during our divorce proceedings when discussing the extent of Gates's Epstein relationship. That language is important because it signals that she has direct documentary evidence beyond what's in the public record, evidence obtained through legal discovery that would normally remain confidential. The decision to reference those documents publicly, even without revealing their specific contents, sends a powerful message. I know what really happened. I have the receipts, and if pushed, I can substantiate everything I'm saying. The bombshell moment came near the end of the CBS interview when Melinda was asked directly whether she believes Bill Gates was fully truthful with the public about his Epstein relationship. She paused for several seconds, a pause that CBS News chose to leave in the broadcast, and then said, "I think the public deserves complete transparency about those relationships and the extent of those dealings, and I think that transparency has been lacking." Legal analysts immediately recognize this as potentially devastating language. When the ex-spouse who knows you better than almost anyone publicly questions your truthfulness about relationships with a convicted sex offender, that's catastrophic for your credibility. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. And here's what has congressional investigators particularly excited about Melinda's interview. She specifically mentioned raising concerns about the Epstein relationship on multiple occasions starting in 2013. That timeline is crucial because newly unsealed documents show that Gates and Epstein continued meeting regularly through at least 2014, more than a year after Melinda says she first objected. This suggests that Gates actively chose to continue the relationship despite his wife's concerns, which legal experts say could be relevant to questions about his judgment, his willingness to conceal relationships, and his credibility when he later minimized the connection publicly. This puts Gates in a nearly impossible defensive position. On one side, he faces congressional investigations backed by documentary evidence showing the Epstein relationship was far more extensive than publicly acknowledged. On the other side, he now has his ex-wife, someone with intimate knowledge of his personal conduct and access to documents from divorce discovery, publicly stating that his disclosures have been inadequate and that she objected to the relationship years before their marriage ended. There's no good response to this combination. Either admit the relationship was more significant than previously stated, or continue denying and face the prospect of both congressional testimony and potential testimony from Melinda that could contradict those denials under oath. And here's the tricky part. Melinda holds enormous credibility with precisely the audiences that matter most for the Gates Foundation's continued effectiveness. She's respected by women's rights advocates, global health leaders, and philanthropic partners worldwide. Her organization, Pivotal Ventures, has become a major force in funding gender equality initiatives. When someone with that kind of standing publicly questions her ex-husband's truthfulness about Epstein, It doesn't just damage his personal reputation, it threatens the operational effectiveness of the Gates Foundation itself because partners may not want to be associated with an organization whose founder faces questions about concealed relationships with a convicted sex trafficker. Legal and political analysts are calling this a turning point in the entire Epstein accountability story. A Harvard law professor who specializes in nonprofit governance told MSNBC that Melinda's interview fundamentally changed the dynamics of the congressional investigation by providing what he called highly credible corroboration from someone with inside knowledge and no apparent motive to fabricate. He noted that unlike political opponents or advocacy groups, Melinda has every incentive to protect the Gates Foundation's reputation since she remains a trustee. The fact that she's willing to make these statements despite those institutional interests suggests the documentary evidence must be extremely serious. A former federal prosecutor added that Melinda's references to raising concerns multiple times starting in 2013 could be particularly significant if there's evidence that Gates Foundation governance protocols required disclosure of potential reputational risks. If Melinda was raising red flags internally about Epstein while Gates failed to disclose the relationship to other trustees or compliance officers, that could trigger both legal and governance violations. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. So let's break down what this could mean for all the major players involved. First, for Bill Gates personally, this is arguably the most damaging moment in a crisis that has been building since the divorce announcement in 2021. He now faces coordinated congressional investigations, potential IRS scrutiny, possible civil litigation from Epstein victims, and public statements from his ex-wife questioning his truthfulness. Together, they represent an unprecedented threat to his reputation and philanthropic legacy. Second, for the Gates Foundation, Melinda's interview creates immediate operational challenges. Major foundation partners will now face questions about whether they can continue working with an organization whose co-founder stands accused of inadequate transparency. A confidential survey of Gates Foundation grantees conducted in late January, results leaked to the Washington Post, found that 38% were concerned about reputational damage and 17% were actively considering whether to continue partnerships. Those numbers were gathered before Melinda's interview. They're almost certainly higher now. Third, for Melinda herself, the interview represents a carefully calculated decision to protect her own reputation by creating clear distance from her ex-husband's conduct, by establishing publicly that she objected to the Epstein relationship from 2013 onward. She insulates herself from any suggestion that she was complicit. This matters enormously for her continued work on gender equality and women's empowerment. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate crisis management, this is really about fundamental questions of accountability in elite networks. The public has long suspected that wealthy and powerful individuals protect each other and face limited consequences for associations that would destroy ordinary people's careers. Melinda's decision to break that pattern by publicly confirming that Gates's Epstein relationship was significant enough to contribute to ending their marriage represents a rare moment of accountability from inside the elite circle itself. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. This scenario has created panic among Gates's advisors and allies. Reports indicate that his legal team held emergency strategy sessions on February 2nd to determine how to respond. Some argued for complete disclosure and cooperation. Others maintained that privacy concerns limit what can be said publicly. The fundamental challenge they face is that Melinda has now established a narrative that Gates's public statements were inadequate, making any continued resistance to full disclosure look like proof she was right. Things escalated further when the CBS interview generated immediate congressional response. Representative Jamie Raskin, Democratic ranking member on the House Oversight Committee, issued a statement on February 2nd saying that Melinda's account raises urgent questions about when Gates Foundation trustees were informed. He announced that the committee would be requesting all foundation board meeting minutes and conflict of interest disclosures from 2011 through 2015. Senator Elizabeth Warren went further, stating that if Gates maintained an undisclosed relationship with a convicted sex offender while running a tax-exempt foundation, it represents exactly the kind of unchecked power that justifies fundamental reform of how we regulate major philanthropic organizations. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you view the situation. Here's what makes it even more devastating for Gates. Melinda's interview wasn't just about establishing her own narrative. It also included a pointed reference to other women who had raised concerns about Gates's judgment and workplace conduct. While she didn't provide specifics, this language clearly refers to reports about Gates's alleged inappropriate behavior toward Microsoft employees and foundation staff. By linking the Epstein relationship to broader patterns of judgment failures, Melinda painted a picture not of one isolated mistake, but of systematic issues with judgment and transparency. This goes far beyond personal scandal. It's about whether the systems we have in place to ensure accountability for tax-exempt foundations actually work when tested against someone with enormous wealth and influence. If Gates can maintain extensive undisclosed relationships with a convicted sex offender, continue those relationships despite objections from his spouse, and then minimize the connections publicly without facing meaningful consequences, it suggests those systems are fundamentally broken. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's the situation. Melinda French Gates has publicly confirmed that Bill Gates's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was significant enough to contribute to ending their marriage, that she raised objections starting in 2013 which were not heeded, and that his public disclosures have been inadequate. This comes as 53 members of Congress are investigating documents showing 37 documented meetings, offshore transactions, and communications that contradict Gates's previous characterizations. When your ex-spouse confirms that congressional investigators are right to question your truthfulness, you've entered genuinely unprecedented crisis territory. Congressional investigators are now reportedly seeking to interview Melinda under oath. The Gates Foundation faces growing pressure from partners about reputational concerns, and victim advocacy groups are citing Melinda's statements as evidence that Gates should face accountability. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here's where things stand right now. One of the world's most powerful women just went on national television to confirm that her ex-husband's relationship with a convicted sex offender was more significant than he has publicly acknowledged, that she objected strenuously and was ignored, and that the public deserves more transparency. Congressional committees with subpoena power are investigating with apparent corroboration from Melinda's timeline, and the Gates Foundation's operational effectiveness hangs in the balance. This isn't just another scandal. This is a fundamental test of whether accountability applies equally to billionaire philanthropists or whether wealth creates protection from consequences. What happens next could determine whether the Gates Foundation survives in its current form, whether Bill Gates faces legal or financial penalties, and whether the broader system of philanthropic tax exemptions faces major reform. The most credible witness has spoken. The congressional investigators are armed with her corroboration, and the evidence continues mounting. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage.